Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. This is Logos Media's UnSpun episode number 130. I'm here today with Bob Schlenker and Aaron Hermann, and we're here to get into a lot of interesting research that these two gentlemen have been doing into various symbolism regarding the occult, pedophilia, homosexuality, etc. It makes for a great follow-up episode to the Logos Roundtable that we had the other night with Mark in Australia. But so, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
And for those of you who are wondering, I've been locked out of my Facebook page for 24 hours for telling the truth that there are only two genders and upsetting the social justice warriors. So I have been locked out of my YouTube page. You can go to my Twitter feed and see the post that they blocked me for. It's pretty funny. So anyway, welcome, guys. Welcome, everybody in the chat. We want to first go into your hands up material, I suppose. And then I've got some other questions for you gentlemen about some of your other videos on your channel. I did post the link to your channel in the show notes. And also, I wanted to mention thanks to everyone who donated this past week and supported the show. Thanks also to everybody who supported on Patreon. There is a Patreon link up there in the top of the video. If you just mouse over, it's up in the top right corner, and it'll take you right there. Greatly appreciate all the support. So... first off, I'm going to ask you, Bob, and you're down there on the bottom. What first set you on to investigating this hands up thing? And for those who are wondering, it's just hands up, And so what first put you onto this?
Well, I looked at an image that was a license plate for an Indiana youth group, which is an LGBTQ support organization for youth in Indianapolis. And their logo is a bunch of rainbow colored hands and arms sticking out of a circle. And I looked at that a bunch of times, and I understood because of our familiarity with the anus symbolism that this was definitely that. And the rainbow made it very clear. And why the hands up? And I didn't really know what they meant by that. And I kept seeing it in other places, and it was just resonating with me that there's just a very dramatic connection there because of the way that when they do occult signaling, they layer things up that mean the same thing. It's like they take a Rosetta Stone and they just keep adding to it to increase the strength of the magic that goes along with it. And it's real magic, it's symbol magic. So when I understood that, yeah, this is a sign that has to do with the LGBT movement and the sodomite gateway, I began to kind of see an explosion of these things that were all very similar. And I went to visit Aaron on my birthday last year, and I shared with him how I'd been seeing these things and started to collect some images on it, put some notes together for a potential series. And Aaron and I, over the course of maybe half an hour to an hour, we got online and we just found reams of stuff all on the same theme. So I've been collecting notes for quite some time on it, collecting images and compiling it, and finally started to put some videos together, rolling this stuff out slowly. We've got 3 videos out already and 1 in the works and quite a few other notes.
All right. And so how long have you been making videos? I noticed you did a video on the Super Bowl Prince presentation that got a lot of attention. How long have you been putting stuff out and analyzing occult symbolism?
I've been doing blogs with the symbolism and doing it on my regular website since about 2008. so about 10 years. And I've been working my videos on the YouTube channel for about, I don't know, 7 years, somewhere around there.
So, about as long as I've been doing it. Let's see, I started the podcast 10 years ago and then launched the video. I was uploading videos before then, but started the video shows in about 2012. So, yeah, it's actually next week is the 10th anniversary of the show. So, anyway, all right, so let's get into this hands up material. What are some of the themes? And do you have images that you're able to share, or should I just pull up your videos and maybe show some of it on screen, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can share some images. I don't have the ones for the first videos. If you want to start with that, you can bring it up.
All right, let me do that. I'll just pull it up here. I've got, and by the way, for those of you who want to find this in the database, it's just type in hands up in the top, and it'll pull up hands up. It looks like this in the database. It's connected to pedophilia in general, and you'll see that there's just 3 links here. So here we go. Let's just pull this up over here. Let's see if I can get this going. All right, there we go. And so anyway, you've got this symbolism, and I'm showing it on screen here. You want to explain some of the symbolism that you're showing there?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a collection here. Most of these I haven't gotten to present on yet. It's just a varied selection of people with their hands up in contexts that are sodomite. And obviously, it's not just a dance move, although it's pretty popular. And here's the image of the rainbow hand sticking up out of the manhole.
Yeah, okay. So you're, okay, I was just flipping through some of them. So here, let me go back to the one that's showing the manhole there so that the audience can see that. My apologies. All right. Here we go. I'll just go to the one on the webpage. Thank you so much, Anthony. I really appreciate the $10 super chat. He says, "Here's some love, Jan. Much appreciated." So this is your channel, the Open Scroll, and so people can see you're showing the Indiana Youth Group symbol there, and you've got in the logo there, you've got hands coming up. What is that?
Their logo, and it's on their Facebook page. It's all over the place. So it's the Roy G. Biv rainbow hands. And
Yep.
The one that's most prominent is the green in the middle, and that's Satan's color, according to some who studied the Illuminati. So the hands up coming out of the circle, if you know that Indianapolis is called Circle City, you could use that as kind of a good cover story, but it's not just that.
You want to go in? You know what? We haven't even let Aaron say a word yet. We should probably let Aaron say hello and jump in here as well.
Well, this is Bob's expertise, so I'm more than happy to let him run with it. And
all right. Well, and I just also want to say, welcome, Aaron, and give you a chance to say hello too. So sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. Thanks again for having me. And Bob, go ahead, man. This is all you.
All right, go ahead, Bob. And I've got my face covered so that the audience can see what we're talking about on screen there.
Okay. Yeah, the group picture there of the Indiana Youth Group, it's kind of a sad deal, but they've got a lot of the rainbow motif, of course, and this is one of their larger get-togethers, and they've got kind of an astronomy feature. They've got a large telescope, and they've got some stars hanging in the sky. And if you are familiar with the kind of symbolism that goes along with that, they've got some alien faces too. The falling stars are fallen angels. In the Bible, there's a metaphor where stars are angels. And this is widely used. So typically when you see stars, you can just substitute for that angels. And they're gonna, because they're being represented in symbolism, they're gonna be the fallen variety. And those are also aliens. Aliens are fallen angels. And so there's a connection there. it's not random. And you'll see people also with hands up that are inside this metal globe. So whoever puts these things together, they know what they're doing. This is occult signaling. It's not just random people who just happen to like this motif.
And then we start seeing the same symbolism all over the place. So do you want to talk about where you and Aaron started finding it?
I kind of got a start, a lot of years ago, and I didn't really do anything with it until 2008. And during the Olympics that year, it was in Beijing, everybody does their fancy ceremonies, and the Chinese put on a pretty epic ceremony that'll probably never be topped. And it was supposed to be about their history, but they went into some really ancient history. They went into actually kind of a Genesis scenario. And they took it on up through the very end of the cultural arc of history, through what the Bible refers to as the mark of the beast. And during the ceremony, they modeled this special event of the anointing of the mark of the beast, and the beast himself getting his anointing. And it was done in a very clever way, very beautifully choreographed, and it just dovetailed. It was like a perfect part of the ceremony. Nobody would ever know if they didn't understand where they were going with this. But when you knew what was going on, you could see the symbolism, and it was all in sequence and very cleverly done. And when I looked a little bit further, I saw that there was an 8-minute ceremony that was done in promotion of the upcoming Olympics that were going to be in London. And during this 8-minute London ceremony, they had a performance by several people that you wouldn't know, and it was focused around a soccer ball. And the soccer ball happened to be the seed of the anointing of the lawless one. So they were playing off the same theme. And the London ceremony was brilliant. They brought in aspects from the audio and synchronized it with a video that was a masterpiece of occult imagery. And I spent about 6 months largely focused on decoding what was going on there, even going so far as to kind of follow the trail into reverse speech, because Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page was featured there, and they were signaling some of the other Zeppelin classics there. And I had to go down that trail and root out what was going on. And it led me to reverse speech and some other very interesting angles, which were very evident. It was very obvious to me that these were intentional and that they were layering it up. So that was really the first major episode of my delving into the occult, decoding. But this was along the lines of what I'd been doing for a while, decoding signs as a Christian minister, and having an interest in understanding what things were really meant. So I was looking at events, certain other kinds of signs in the heavens, looking at the Bible, seeing the Bible symbolism, matching things up.
Well, and you and I were discussing, I suppose it was yesterday on the phone, after I survived jury duty, that oh shoot, now I just lost my train of thought. Ah, dang it. What were you just saying? Sorry about that.
I was talking about decoding events and biblical symbolism.
Right. Yeah, you know what? It'll come to me in a second. I just had a big point to make too. But yeah, anyway, sorry folks. Just lost it. So anyway, Aaron, what about you, and what were your thoughts in going along and discussing or discovering all of this information? Is this something you set out knowing, or you were, and I just remembered that thought, and you were, or were you, was it all just new for you, or you knew about this already?
Would you like to get to your point before you forget, and then I can answer?
No, go ahead. That's all right.
Okay. Well, Bob's been at this far longer than I have. I wasn't. The Lord didn't even get a hold of me until mid 2009, and I'd always kind of known something was off, but never really did a lot of studying of occult signaling or symbolism or anything like that. Just kind of knew that the world wasn't as it was, said to be. Going through college, and everything always just seemed a little off, but had far more questions and not very many answers. And then I met up with Bob in October of 2010, and he had already had a pretty healthy start. And so he kind of took me under his wing and started showing me these things. And the Lord was very generous and gracious and opening my eyes to a lot of what was going on. And then I was finally starting to get some answers to the way the world really was, and really starting to come into some real truth. And things started to make a lot more sense to me at that point.
Yeah, they tell you not to read the Bible because it explains everything going on right now, and it lays it out. I get these people that attack me all the time, and I used to be this way too, so I get it. But, it's always the ones who don't read something, whether it's a paper you write or the Bible or whatever, who always think that they're smarter than everyone who's read it, So you'll get somebody who's never read the Bible who thinks he's smarter than the billion people who've read it. And, but, it's basically, to me, it's like your owner's manual. It lays out how all the lies work, how the truth works, how God is truth, Jesus is the way, the truth, the life, etc. And it repeats about 200 times. Look, live in truth. God is truth. It's all about the truth. Here's Satan. Here's how he works. And it lays out how all of the deceptions and everything work. And when you go through with critical thinking and everything, it really begins to unfold. So, for me reading it, it was a big wake-up call because it really just laid things out so simply if you just take the time to read it and say, oh, well, rather than, thinking I'm smarter than everybody else who's actually read this book because I haven't, let me sit down and read it, see what it says, see what it has to offer. All of these people must think it has something of value in it. And so, at least I want to know what they believe. And so you sit down and read it. But to my point earlier that Bob and I were talking about yesterday on the phone is that what they do is they simply go through the Bible, the Quran, et cetera, any of the religious texts, the Book of Mormon, probably others too, anything that's about truth and living in truth, they take it and they invert it, and they just do the opposite. So the Bible says, don't drink blood. They say, we're Satanists and vampires, we drink blood. It says, don't do this. We're going to do this anyway. So throughout these religious texts, we see proper behavior laid out. This is how you should live for a proper functioning society. And if you do these things, you'll live in harmony and have a good life. And then they take that, invert it, and you have your Crowleyites, your Tim Learys, your Dr. John Dees and Hassani Sabahs and everything. And they take everything and they do the antithesis of this to create the biblical fall, essentially, and to peddle as much degeneracy and iniquity onto people as they can in order to hurry or to bring forth this fall and the end of our time. You guys agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Bible is full of accounts where people raise their hands and praise and worship to God and in blessing his people. And that's a good thing. That's what hands are for. That's what we should do with them. And in contrast, people do quite the opposite, and they raise hands that are unholy hands, and they do it to praise the devil and to curse God's people. God says to do it with holy hands, raising holy hands in 1 Timothy, and they raise unholy hands. And so they're inverting, flipping, and working in contrast. And this is just a very common occult principle. It's an upside down thing. And so when you see hands raised in the context where there's other occult signaling going on, there's usually a multi-layered set of meanings that are associated with it. The LGBTQ, homosexuality, sodomite gateway, that's one major layer that seems to attend all of it.
Well, why don't we talk about that and the connection with the rainbow for a moment? And the rainbow comes from Genesis. Let me just pull that up. The rainbow comes from Genesis 9:1 through 20. What is that? 29 there. And if you read that whole passage, it lays it out. But what they do is they take all of this and they invert it. And interestingly, we see that it starts off about not eating the blood again. And so they're essentially taking all of this. They break the covenant and then use the blood and do all of these things and then pretend like they are keeping the covenant, and that, and therefore, God won't flood the world again. So, and then you see how they've taken the rainbow and they've used it. They've created several different rainbow flags. The first one had 8 colors, and then they created one by Gilbert Baker in '78 with, changed it, took out the pink, and then they have another version down here. But these are all different versions of theirs. They, in a way, I think they inverted the rainbow. They've put red up at the top and violet at the bottom. So, here's the order here that it's supposed to be in. And interestingly, the rainbow has 7 colors, but the gay rainbow has either 8 or 6 colors. You want to jump in there from that point?
I never gave much attention to that, to the numbering of the bands.
Yeah, nor have I. So.
Yeah, well, and I just, the correlation between 7 being God and 666 beast, I just, 6 colors or 8 colors, I thought that was interesting. But what can you say about the Genesis passage and the origins of that, them them using that symbol for homosexuality from Genesis?
Yeah, the rainbow sign is an excellent sign of the covenant, and it also shows that something changed in the physics of the world, in the atmosphere, something where there was no rainbow, all of a sudden now there was. So we know the atmosphere itself and the physics involved with light has changed. And I think this is part of what was necessary to keep the devil from messing with the population and the earth itself like he had. So there's a dimensional barrier that was put in place. And what we found in our study of different media where the rainbow is featured in different ways, it has to do with the breaching of that covenant and the breaching of the dimensional boundary that was set in place as a result of that. Because it was a sign that God would never again destroy the earth by water. And we know that he won't. And that oath is very important. We depend on that. And when the devil messes with the rainbow and he uses the rainbow as a sign, we know that this goes along with what has been expressed as a primary goal, to merge the dimensions, to crash the dimensions together in order to usurp God's authority, in order to exalt his throne above the throne of God, in order to take his place. And so this is a major part of his theme. And really, this rainbow sign that they've hijacked is a direct assault on that oath. Not only the oath of preservation, but the covenant that God made not only with man, but also with the earth itself. It's a twofold covenant. And
I need to finish reading the book of Enoch, but apparently it's in there. And the Hawley says the flood was to destroy the Nephilim. And but what they do is they take that symbol that was, hey, look, God just you fell so far into iniquity and into self-destruction that God wiped everybody out. But now we're going to take the symbol and we're going to use that to promote the very iniquity that the floods were to get rid of, right?
Yeah, good observation here.
And thanks to Gokuchi and Sanchez for the $10 and $5 donations. Thanks so much for the love and support. But so you did a show recently, last year before last, on Prince, on the whole Super Bowl presentation with Prince and the veil, and going through this. For the audience who wants to check out more of that, I definitely recommend, and I'm just going to pull up your channel here. I definitely recommend people go to your channel, because you have some ideas that are kind of overlooked in a lot of the other stuff, but at the or a lot of ideas that we've overlooked. And I've covered a lot of symbolism in my work with Dr. Hans Utter and many other shows revealing how they do the music. And I'm just pulling up one of these here, but we have this one here, Justin Timberlake or whomever, and it's supposed to be Prince's guitar right there, but you can clearly see that it's a symbol of Satan with Satan's tail there, and he's behind the veil, and then he reaches up, he's and sings, "I'd gladly, I would die for you," and meaning not God or Prince or mimicking Prince, but getting the audience to go along in this ritual to Satan. You want to go into that?
Yeah, a lot of people noticed that. I was happy to see that people were paying attention, and that a lot of people did identify that scene of Prince with the guitar as a scene with the devil's tail. And when you listen very closely and pay close attention to what's being sung and what's being said, you see that Justin Timberlake is actually leading a ritual of giving allegiance to the Prince of the Night. He says 2 fingers in the air for the Prince of the Night when you listen very closely. And it's a Baphomet pose, 2 fingers in the air. And what they're doing is they were kind of hijacking Prince's image for the Prince of the Night and giving allegiance to him. And that's what the ritual was about. Very clever.
Now talk about Prince's sigil.
Yeah, he used that as his identity, his personal identity for a season. And, the backstory on that is he was having some issues with his contract. I think it was with Sony. And a lot of people want to deny that it's actually a sigil, but the way it was used, very obviously it is. And it's a sigil that is basically related to a form of chaos magic, where you make up your own, you don't tell anybody what it is, and it actually works according to whatever it is that your intention was when you created and when you use that sigil.
And what does that sigil mean? What is Prince's specific sigil? What does it mean?
I really don't know.
It looks like it looks like the symbol of the androgyne. It looks like we've got, the male and female symbol there with a little bit of other stuff going on. But I haven't actually gone further into researching that specific sigil.
It has elements of the androgyne, the male and the female, and the spiral is also a goddess symbol. So the goddess is definitely exalted. There's a plus, an O, and the sigil, and it looks like there's a kind of a trumpet shape there. But he obviously had some other intent that he didn't declare, and I really don't know what that is.
All right. What about you, Aaron? You got anything to add to that?
The only thing that comes to mind, looking at the connection between, we're talking about the rainbow and the Prince production there, bringing down the veil in purple. It was obviously one of the major colors being presented there, and purple is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, color of sodomy, next to orange, which both rainbow colors, and sodomy plays such a huge role in what we were talking about there. And one of the reasons that the flood was brought about in the first place, and sodomy is related to the dimensional breaching and mind control and the sodomite warriors and arrest. And So there's the connections there throughout both of those, with the dimensional breaching, the veil coming down, and the merging of the dimensions, as Bob was talking about.
All right, let's get into the Olympics. You've done some analysis of that as well. What can you say about the Olympics?
Wow, there's a topic. Yeah, we've covered a lot of Olympics. I covered the 2012 extensively. Aaron and I were both just on the edge of our seat through the whole thing. We were anticipating some things going into it because the Lord was definitely leading us in certain directions, and everything they did on the Olympics was right on those lines, and it was an extraordinary season. So I covered the ones in 2008 in Beijing, and then 2010 in Vancouver, 2012 in London was really the highlight. And since then, there's been several more Olympics that I've given some coverage to. And at the Olympics, you really have to understand that it's not just a sporting event. These are dedicated to Zeus and the worship of Zeus and Apollo. And this is done openly. And if you are biblically literate, you know from Revelation 2 that there is a throne of Satan that's referred to as being in Pergamon. And this is now, it's been excavated and reassembled in Berlin. It's in the Berlin Museum. And the throne of Satan is very obviously pointing to Zeus as Satan. So that identity is clear. So when you talk about Zeus worship, you're talking about Satan worship. And worship of Zeus was banned in Greece for a long, long time and only very recently reinstated for very good reason, because it's cruel and abusive and ritual sacrifices required. So the Olympics were always done naked, and you know a lot of the wrestling events were really popular, and you just don't see that in the Olympics now, which is, it just wouldn't be acceptable in normal communities. Although in other communities with the sodomites, they're all about that. When you talk about gymnastics, the word gymnos is translated as naked. That's the meaning of the word gymnast. So when you have gymnastics, you've got naked ass, butts on display. And this is the kind of thing you think, oh, well, you're crazy, your mind's in the gutter, Bob. But when you see this stuff over and over again, you realize that there are people who are responsible for these major things who are completely obsessed with the butt, anal sex, poop eating, all that sort of thing. And it's very closely related to mind control programming, and you can't really separate the two. So when you talk about the Olympics, you're talking about a form of Satan worship that's popularized and people go along with, even though they know, well, this is really all dedicated to Zeus. But it's a global Satanist religion, and it's not just the sports, it's also the arts that are involved, in conjunction with any Olympics. There's an awful lot of focus on art installations, and oftentimes it's a very extended season. If you look at the London Olympics and what went on the season before that, there's just one long series of things masquerading as art that were really performance rituals that were designed to prepare the way for the Olympics. And we talked about dimension breaching with the rainbow. And with the Olympics, the breaching of the dimensions was the main focus during the season of 2012. And this was something that was kind of prefaced during the London ceremony in Beijing 4 years earlier. So I was very focused on that and kind of had a sense of what was going to unfold there in 2012. And as we watched it, we saw lots of laser light stuff, rainbow stuff, openly sodomite stuff. We saw huge focus on bells. And bells are used to open dimensional barriers. This has been a practice of witches and magicians for thousands and thousands of years. When you think of a priesthood, you think of them ringing bells. There's churches with bells in the towers. The bells were prominent during the London Olympics. There was one very special that was created, and it was imprinted upon with an inscription, a quote from Caliban, from Shakespeare's The Tempest. And so we call it the Belle of Caliban. Caliban was an Antichrist figure, half-breed, half-god, half-man, a beast. And they put this inscription on there, and they quoted it a lot during the ceremonies. And when they rang the bell, Aaron heard something in the spirit, didn't you, Aaron?
Yes, I did. I just very clearly heard the Lord say, "It has begun."
All right, let's get into, you've done a video on MK Ultra and sodomy, and I'm extensively researched in MK Ultra. I've exposed many of the key players behind it, Tim Leary, Aldous Huxley, Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, Grateful Dead, and you're familiar with Dave McGowan's work exposing the Laurel Canyon scene. Dr. Hans Utter and I did about 30 episodes taking McGowan's lead, but going far deeper than he went in his book and research and series on that. And of course, McGowan died a couple years ago, but we were fortunate enough to have him on the show 2 or 3 times before he died. But what can you say about what you found there with MK Ultra and sodomy in that direction?
In the video that I made about Kinder eggs, I exposed how it was just a very long ritual presentation. It wasn't about teaching children colors. It was about color programming and mind control programming of children. And it was obviously designed to facilitate programming when handlers and programmers are actually programming children that are typically about 3 years old. And it's just up on YouTube, and people have no idea what's really going on behind some of these productions. But, you know, my entrance into that, I'd heard in the 90s of different things going on. I was always curious, but I couldn't really relate to it personally unless the Lord, you know, does something to provide a hook for me. I just look at it with interest, kind of take what I learned, put it on the back shelf and ponder it. But I discovered that I was actually married to an Illuminati slave, and my 2 children were therefore also slaves. And this was quite a shock to me when I discovered what was going on. So when I knew what was going on, I was able to look at some of the things that people were saying about it and kind of glean what was true about it. And the more research I did, the more I saw these things being embedded in media. They weren't just presented in plots. They were, but they were also embedded in other ways, in occult ways. And when you see things kind of clustered and layered in the occult way, you know there's a reason for it, because it works subliminally. It works a spell. And so when something's done and it's overt on the surface, certainly it's important, worth noting. But when they cluster things in an occult way, you know, it's part of a ritual, it's part of a spell, and it's potentially playing on several levels all at the same time. And when they factor sodomy into it with the MK Ultra programming, well, it's kind of a natural, because sodomy is used in the programming. They install their demonic legion that's the key to spinning off all the alter identities, and then it's the key to programming these pairs of alters through their seasons of programming. But it's also covered.
I was just going to add, it's also, it's so when you consider the covenant of marriage, a man and woman, solidify, what's the word? Right as I went to say the word, has slipped my mind, consummate the marriage through the union of intercourse between husband and wife. So if you think of Satanists, and I sent you a passage where the Mormons discuss this from Moses 5. It's like 5:47 through 53 or something like that, where they're discussing this very thing and how, how the Satanists essentially use anal sex to consummate their contracts and their oaths. So, of course, whatever is in the Bible to consummate one thing, the Satanists, they take it and they invert it. They do the Kabbalistic inversion, and then they do the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
You have anything to add to that? Or either one of you? Aaron's pretty quiet up there.
The only thing that really comes to mind, the whole sodomy connection, it goes the whole way back to what happened in the garden. I mean, it goes throughout all of history. And when you get a hold of that, what's going on in the world around us makes a whole lot more sense. And you can just kind of put it in the bigger context.
Okay, so you did, 3 videos, what, a 45-minute piece essentially on the hands up thing. Do you guys want to go more into what you found in that, or do you think we've covered it sufficiently for the audience and we should move on to other topics?
Well, we've covered it just lightly and probably enough where if people are curious, they can check out those 3 videos. I've got another one in the works, and we've got probably 7 or 8 more probable videos in the queue that I'm working on organizing and collecting images for and gathering thoughts about. But yeah, we've got a lot of other very interesting things we could be talking about that your audience is probably familiar with. So what a good direction is. So take it away.
Well, and and I've done research on X2, and as have you. But so we were discussing the X-Men yesterday, and in one of your videos, you have a clip from the X-Files that's really interesting, and I want to get to that after we discuss this. But first, let's get into the X-Men by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And, of course, I had done research on that in my article. Let me just pull that up here. People can find it on the Secret History of Magic Mushrooms page. If you scroll all the way or just hit the link here, how Darwin, Huxley, and the Esalen Institute launched the 2012 and psychedelic revolutions and began one of the largest mind control operations in history. Now, all of the, for those of you who know, some of the audience likes to play a drinking game whenever we mention a Huxley. So, because the Huxleys end up being tied into all of this stuff. But so I start this article off, and this is from 2013. My investigation into Thomas Henry Huxley's background, grandfather to Aldous and Julian, reveals him as the key promoter of Darwin's theories, who was his friend and teacher. And through Huxley's X Club, they created academics who would promote Darwin's ideas. And then it says, not coincidentally, spin-offs of the X Club include the X-Men comic series on eugenics and evolution, the Fourth World comics on mind control by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the Fourth World being tied to the UN's Agenda 21. And then there was an unsaid video there by the Fourth World Wilderness, and that has since been taken down. I don't know if I play that yet or if I have a copy of that. It is in my interview. Now, if I'm forgetting the guy who was there at that, but I interviewed him years ago. If you just search unsaid, I think the interview is called Say What Is Unsaid, UNCED, on the Logos Media website. You'll find that and him exposing all of this. But my feeling is that the word X for MDMA is directly related, X-Files, which is interesting because we are talking about X, and this bit of information was in the new X-Files, and possibly many others. Later, Julian Huxley would take up his grandfather's stance on promoting Darwin's theory, eugenics, and humanism, etc. publishing nearly a dozen books on the topic. Aldous would follow suit via his novels. And then on contemplating the idea of why Thomas Huxley would name his club the X Club, that was used to promote Darwin's theories in eugenics, it hadn't originally crossed my mind that I had once researched the topic of X for my first book. And then on page 152, 153, we wrote, X marks the spot is common symbolic usage. In fact, it's universal symbolism. X is associated with the perfect man in Psalms 37:37. Mark the perfect man and behold the upright, for the end of man is peace. The mark of the archetypal perfect man is the cross. The cross is an upright X. In Ezekiel, a mark is set upon the foreheads of selected men in Jerusalem, and all other men, women, and children are slaughtered. And then Ezekiel 9:6, slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, women and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark. And again at my sanctuary, then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. You want to take off from there on the topic of X?
Yeah, the X is a really fundamental symbol, and some believe that it's the original mark that was put on Cain for protection. It's believed by some occultists to represent the mark of the beast itself. And when you look at the language used in Revelation 13, verse 18, where the mark is mentioned in the 666, it's three Greek words that are translated that, 600, three score and six. And it has to do with an inscription and inscribing, an insertion into the skin. And the stigmata is a unused word, and it has to do with an X, basically. It's the X mark, a charagma. And this is like a sign, you know, you can trace that X all the way back. And very fundamentally, when you look at the form of an X, it's a crossing. And when you understand what the devil's motivation is, and you want to take that seriously, he wants to exalt his throne above the throne of God. And this is very widely known. And all his efforts are basically to that end. So in occult usage, the X means flip this. It's a transformation. And so when you see the devil, he's trying to exalt himself above the throne of God, and he hijacks the X as a form of this transformation where he becomes in God's stead as God himself. We know from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that he is going to be seen as God himself on the throne. So there's going to be a manifestation of this. So people will recognize him as the true God. So at some point, the play will be made that God will be deposed. And this all has a legitimacy in his use of the X and hijacking the X as a transformation mark. So it's the mark of the beast. It's a identification with the beast, of the Antichrist beast. Christ is associated with the cross. It's hijacked as an upside down cross sometimes, but also the X. And all these crosses, even right side up cross, is hijacked. You see a lot of rappers wearing the cross, a lot of other rock stars wearing the cross, not an upside down one, but it looks like, oh, these are Christians. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with Antichrist. It has to do with where their allegiance is in the transformation, in the flipping and the inversion, so that Lucifer himself will be on the throne instead of God. So this is a kind of a coup d'etat marker that you see when you see the X. And that's kind of a fundamental layer. It's played up in a lot of different ways. I've studied the X quite a bit over the years and considered what the contexts are. And I believe that really is the fundamental to it.
What, excuse me, what is the mark of the beast? You and I had a pretty long rap about that yesterday. You want to rehash some of that?
Well, when it's implemented, I believe it's going to have kind of a twofold aspect to it. We're told that no one will be able to buy or sell without the mark. So we understand in our system today that this has a digital basis to it, ones and zeros. It's binary code, it's digital, and there's going to be kind of an internet. And if you don't have the app basically installed in your person, you're not going to be able to access that. So it's kind of a death warrant without supernatural help. The other aspect of it has to do with the image, you know, each person having the image of the beast in their DNA. It has to do with, I believe, a triple helix transformation that's going to take place. And you've got to have the beast already, who will have a specific DNA kind of marker that needs to be replicated. And people will be transformed by that in body. And then because of the body, their blood also, and because of the blood, the soul. And this will create for other entities a host body. And we understand as Christians that we are hosts in a sense. We have Holy Spirit, and there's a transformation that takes place, and we're not the same. This is a legitimate transformation that takes place, and other people have observed that medically, that there is some kind of transformation. When you see somebody go through a life change, their face changes, the way they carry themselves change, their behavior changes, they just change. It's a legitimate change. And so when the mark of the beast happened, people will adopt the nature of the beast, and it will be in their body. And this is why it can't be repented of. You can't just undo it, because the transformation is permanent. You can't repent of taking the mark of the beast, because you're no longer able to make such a decision, because basically you've checked out, you've exchanged your own soul, you've offered up your body as a host, and then it's been occupied by demons, fallen angels, who were like the Nephilim in the age past. But they will populate the earth, and they will have bodies. And this is what they've been looking for since the flood. They've been trying to get rebodied. A lot of different people have looked into this. We don't really give it that much attention on our website because other people have done an adequate job. But we understand that this mark of the beast is going to take place, and it's going to be accepted willingly. It can't be forced on a person. When they accept it, it's permanent, and it's legit. And this is one of the things that's signaled in the X, actually, this transformation that is the mark.
Well, yeah, so X is often a symbol of trans, whatever, X. So that would fit. And of course, Julian Huxley came up with transhumanism. And then I'm not sure if Aldous came up with transgender. I wouldn't be surprised, though. All of that stuff, when you research it, always goes to the Huxleys. But let's see. So I want to get into some of your deep stuff here. You've been working on a pretty interesting theory. I was looking at some of your work tonight, and apparently you got a clue on it from the X-Files. But you were looking at the Mandela Effect, and you had come across some work. At first I just wanted to dismiss what you were saying, but you brought together a lot of key points, and just because I'm not aware of something doesn't mean that it's incorrect. So I wanted to spend some time on this tonight, entertaining this idea on the Mandela Effect, and you have an idea that they are trying to mess with time. Would you like to go into that for a while?
Sure. Yeah, when you consider the Mandela Effect, that things in our reality are no longer what they used to be, and whether you accept that that's the case or not, you really can hardly deny that some believe it and that they agree on exactly what the nature of what a thing was before. So we know that that's an indication that there's something to it, whether a person personally can identify with the changes that have been taking place. So when you think about the possibility of things changing in the past, and and with an awareness that it's not just a mental thing, that it's not just we're thinking wrong. You have to see that time itself isn't just a strict linear continuity. And we know enough about scientific theory that it's been documented that it's not just a linear continuity, that there's more involved there. You can have things that happen and the cause of what happened hasn't happened yet. We see the result before the cause, which is an absurdity from one perspective, but it's a reality, a documented reality, when you look at some of the experiments that have been done. So when we look at the Bible, we see other documented cases where time has been manipulated. There's a day called Joshua's Long Day, where the sun didn't go down until he had victory over his enemies. There's a situation with a man named Hezekiah, who was given a sign that he wouldn't die, that 15 years would be given to him as an extension of his life. And the sign was 15 degrees on the compass. And he was asked, would you like it to go forward or back? And he said, well, going forward, well, that's easy. Well, not really, but he said, let it go back. And so the shadow went back, and it wasn't just the moving of the shadow, it was time itself. So there's a precedent to this. We know that there's been time travel as a major theme, and this has gone on for quite some time, not just in novels, but it was historical way before that, and documented as being so. And now in today's media, you can hardly find 10 movies where one of them doesn't have time travel as a major plot. It's just crazy. TV show after TV.
That's an interesting point that you say that. I'm glad you brought that up. Where the heck, what is your video called where you discuss this? Now I'm trying to figure out where it was.
Aaron, do you know which one he's thinking of in particular?
The X-Files, The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat. You talking about the X-Files video?
No, I'm talking about the one that goes into CERN and all of that.
Mandela Effect, Happy at CERN. I think that's...
I'm sure it's right here on the screen and I'm not seeing it. Anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bob.
Yeah, CERN's involved on some level. So with the time thing, if you can manipulate something about the past in some way, and understanding that time is fluid like water. Water is a symbol of time. If you drop a pebble into the water, you have concentric rings. It's not a wave along a line. It's not just simply a sine wave. It's concentric ripples in time. And so when you think about time and space as a kind of a fabric, you can see that this is not even just two-dimensional, that this is
try not to use that one during the show because it pops up a bar on the bottom. I don't know if you can just email it. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Aaron was sending me something there.
Okay. So the issue with time is that time goes forward and back. If you have an event that happens right now, well, it goes forward and back. And, some of us have experienced deja vu, and we wonder, how does that work? Where does that come from? Aaron and I have been tracking these heptadic cycles, 7-year cycles, for a lot of years. And we recognize that, these have a beginning, but that it influences the future and it influences the past. And when you realize that God is outside of time, time is just a limited construct, and that there are higher dimensions that time itself is contained within, you realize that there's far more to this in our reality that we just don't really have an easy way of describing. We see different effects, and we can identify certain kinds of effects. And one of these is what we call the Mandela Effect. And somebody's been manipulating things to have the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz wielding a revolver. And the names of department stores have changed. Hundreds of Mandela effects have been documented, and it's gotten to the point where some people are kind of gaming the system.
All right. So now, typically, I would just dismiss this and say, arguing the arbitrary, the onus of proof is on you to support your claims. Now, looking at your video, you do provide some interesting things that make me pause and think, okay, what if I'm the one who just hasn't looked at the evidence well enough? Like in your videos, et cetera, you've got several videos where you're kind of laying this stuff out and trying to piece it together. What happened here? I just switched. So, and you show, like, they even use mandalas to show the Mandela Effect in different places, and you break down different movies where they're talking about this. So let's just suppose for a second now, okay, so last year this organization, CERN, did this huge satanic ritual, they're using these huge atom colliders, and we assume that they're just, trying to smash particles and whatnot. But what if they're trying to create as you suggest, a ripple in time or a wormhole that they can then stretch out and manipulate time? Do you want to go into that? And I just also want to say thank you, Polygonal Construction, for the $4.99 donation there. He says, please hit the like button and share if you can't donate. So much appreciated for that. And also thanks to Lex Van Man for the £5 donation from England. Really appreciate that. Go ahead there. And you know what? I wanted to ask Aaron, because Aaron had a big smile on his face when I brought up this subject. So, Aaron's got to have something to say on this topic here.
The time thing has just been such a major focus for us. And the one thing I wanted to bring up is we're talking about the Mandela Effect. One of the most astounding ones is Isaiah 11:6, the lion and the lamb, which is now the wolf and the lamb laying down together. And there's a lot of residual evidence where you search for images and it's still continuing, the lion and the lamb, even for people who aren't really that much into the Bible or scholars of any type. But what's really interesting, we did some investigating, and if you go back and look at the manuscripts, from 4th century, the Greek word has been changed to wolf. So it's not just somebody misremembering. The actual biblical manuscripts in Greek reflect the change of wolf to lamb. And if it's not somebody going through time to change it, what plausible?
Well, and that's, my wife just posted this Kronos worship, and Bob and I were discussing this yesterday, and last year before last, I did a large series with Jacob Duhlman on Joseph Scaliger and Anatoly Fomenko's research out of the University of Moscow, Russia, where he argues that they faked history and inserted 1,000 years into the timeline. And when you think of Kronos worship, which is Saturn worship, which is Satan worship, Kronos, Satan, Saturn, that's all the worship of Father Time, who eats or consumes his own children. And so when we think of things in these terms, yeah, of course, the Kronos worshipers would not only rewrite and change history and what we know, but sure, why wouldn't they create massive, particle smashers to try to create wormholes and things like that? It actually... Sorry, I have a hair in my face, stuck in my face somewhere. Why wouldn't they do these things to try to manipulate things to their gain, just like in Back to the Future? So it gives you some pause. What is there that we haven't looked at critically? And, I'm willing to be proven totally wrong on this. It would sure make sense because at the outset, and we've had some ridiculous hit pieces done on us and, regarding Anatoly Fomenko's work and his exposure of faking the Dark Ages. I mean, the man wrote 100 books on this, like over 30 of them are translated into English, just focusing on how they changed history and inserted 1,000 years into the timeline. And he argues it's like the 900s right now, post-Christ, and that a whole extra, just insertion of this period of time. And you can see how it could easily be done. Okay, so just to give an example, you have Isis, and then the year dot, and then let's say it's 586, so 586, or J for Jesus. Of course, the letter J is only about 200 years old, and then dot 586. Or another way that they would have written the date would have been X. Where's that X again? Dot 586. So X would also mean Christ, or I meaning Christ. Well, X is also symbolic of, the Roman numeral 10. So you just put, 1586, and then it becomes 1586. Or with I dot 586, you just delete the dot, and suddenly you have 1586, right? And so they could just easily slip this into the timeline. And then between the 14 and 1600s, they rewrote the history books, erased Tartary from the timeline and from history, and then put out this new chronology. So, it's at first it seemed really far-fetched, and then the more we've looked at Fomenko's research, the more it checks out, and the more his theories are actually, solid. But, if you Google him, you'll see all these articles like, pseudoscience. And, there's this clown who's done hit pieces on us. He did a hit piece on Fomenko this week, and he's just like, I'm not even going to go into this. I didn't bother reading it. I was too stupid to read the work. I can't provide an intelligent argument. He's disinfo, and he wrote like 2.5, 3 pages, not citing anything that Fomenko wrote, just name calling out. I don't even want to mention the guy's name. He's such an incompetent twit. But, anyway, go ahead. You want to go into this a little bit more on the time issue and CERN and this idea that you're coming across that they seem to be pushing in the movies and in front of us constantly?
Sure. A long time ago, there were angel wars, and this is documented throughout the Bible. And this is another dimension we're talking about. And we see certain kinds of things happening today that are what the Bible talks about as spiritual warfare. And these are angel wars also. And what we see going on in heaven goes on in the earth. And this is a biblical principle. And one of the things that we know is that in order for the devil to make his assault on God's throne, he's going to have to do some dimension breaching. He's going to have the ability to control the dimensional boundary. And he's going to only be able to do this by exploiting time. And so time is actually a weapon. It's a strategic manipulation used to bring a certain end. And this is something that's been happening all through history to a degree, but mostly it was in ancient times, and it's going to be in the near future, but it's been coming into play in the last several years as kind of a preparation and ramping up to it. So the control of time needs to be exploited. And this has been done in the past, and there are certain artifacts that we have, one being the Great Pyramid, one that's no longer accessible by the public, the Ark of the Covenant. These are ancient time weapons. And the Ark of the Covenant, there's a easily documented feature about that because of what David Flynn, a researcher, came out with about the temple at the center of time. And this is easily documented. And when we look at these ancient artifacts and we realize that there were magical rituals that went along with it in order to assert control over these things, when we see the things that are being shown us in the media and things that are being said as beans are spilled by occultists, especially those who are involved in mind control programming, they're spilling the beans on what we believe is their plan to assert control over time and exploit that to bring their end game into play. And they're going to be successful to a point, but their ultimate goals will be thwarted. But this manipulation of time is something that when you look at Joseph Farrell and what he's written about the Giza Death Star, and when you look at the dimensional artifacts that he talks about, the way that the Great Pyramid describes certain relationships in the heavens between the earth and the moon, the sun and the moon, the dimensions of the earth, the position of the pyramid on the earth, It's centralized on a grid of nodes consisting of many, 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 many artifacts, both ancient and modern. And when you realize that in order to exploit control, like from one tuning fork to another, you have a resonance principle. You strike one, and if the other's on the same frequency or harmonic, it will also pick up some of the energy from the air, as the waves will cause it to vibrate as well. So this resonance principle is something that is exploited. And with the Great Pyramid, there's a time factor involved because it's said to be a calendar in stone. And the only reason for that calendar, which is a legitimate calendar, is to connect with time itself as a dimensional analog in order to either draw energy from it or to put energy into it for the purpose of manipulation. And so with the Great Pyramid and a system of control, we believe that the ancients exploited this in the ancient angel wars, and that there was an aspect of the manipulation of time that caused them to be able to transit and breach dimensions. And we talked earlier about the rainbow. That's a factor in this. CERN is a factor in this. There's a lot more going on there with frequency and resonance. The computers that are quantum computers like D-Wave that are said to be exploited now. These things are, I believe, useless without the intervention of some controlling factor, which is kind of where the AI factors in and where the monarch slaves, the MK Ultra slaves with their psi powers factor in, because there's nothing that's not connected in. These things are all a factor. And we see this over and over again in media where things are layered up and they're advancing their agendas and they're pulling this whole network of widely divergent technologies together. And there's one goal. Sodomy factors into it because of the mind control. It's also used as a cover, but it's a key to the magic involved. We talked about all this, and just in brief, you really have to touch on the Tower of Babel as well and what was happening there. And the level there was celestial, and planetary colors are believed to be involved in the levels. And when you take the whole big picture and you look at the details and you put it together and you understand what Satan's plan is, you realize that he was very close to achieving his goals with the Tower of Babel, and God got involved, and with separation of people through mixing up the languages, the plan was sorted. But people now around the world, there's a common language. They speak English. Beyond that, there's a mathematical language. Beyond that, there's the internet, the digital language that binds us all together. We're all connected there. There's a language of kind of in harmony with the earth that people have a resonance. And Satan is exploiting all kinds of frequencies to resonate us together, to transform us in certain ways. The GMO foods are involved, the pharmakia, the medicines,
5G,
the atmospheric manipulations through chemtrails and so on. All these things are connected, and they all have one goal, that X, the transformation. Right. And time is a major factor in that. That's why we give so much attention to time, because it's the major deal. If you know the end from the beginning, who could beat you? You can't beat that.
Thanks to Polygonal and Candor for your $5, $4.99 donations each. Candor says, Mud Flood and great show, Jan and panel. Have either of you looked into the Mud Flood thing? I just barely started looking into that a little bit a week ago.
I haven't.
No? So that's another can of worms, apparently, that needs to be looked into. But that's for another day. It needs a lot more research to be done before I'm ready to get into that one. Thanks also, Reese, for the $5 just now. And that's probably a good place to wrap it up for the evening. What I recommend people do is go to your YouTube channel, and it's there in the show notes for the evening. I've put that up there, as well as the links to your 3-part hands up video. I recommend everybody check that out as well. You guys want to give out your website information and contact information, and any information you want to provide for donations?
Well, we've got PayPal button up on our website, theopenscroll.com, also on our blog, the Open Scroll blog. And our YouTube channel, you've got a link to it there. So that's, we don't do any other social media. That's all we've got. So it's pretty straightforward. Most of our website, theopenscroll.com, is devoted to biblical studies, but there's a wide variety of things that you'll find on there. Some biblical studies on the blog, but a lot of it's given attention to decoding and various other themes that are typically not widely known. If somebody's already covered something, I really have no interest in trying to replicate what they've got going on. We just try to stick to what's useful, things that we feel we've caught on to, and have something of value that we think should be said. So,
you recognize patterns like I do, and it's like I don't usually even check if others have covered it. 90% of the time when I do a show, though, nobody else has covered it or covered it from the same angle or whatever. But it doesn't do any good to repeat what's already out there. And I was going through your work, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting stuff. Had no idea of the hands up material, and 2 years ago, maybe almost close to 3 years ago now, or was it just 2 years ago when Pizzagate started to break, and we didn't even get into the whole topic of fake news. You've uncovered stuff on that as well. My goodness, maybe before I wrap it up, I should have you talk about the whole fake news thing. Thanks, Phonic Photon and Anthony, for the support for the show tonight. And he says, would love to talk to you about biblical topics. So thanks, and just shoot me an email. Thanks to Reese. Thanks to everybody who supported the show. Let's have you close on the fake news meme, which they really rolled out when we started exposing Pizzagate and Pedogate and all of that. They wanted to shut that down very quickly, and then thankfully Trump flipped it right back on top of them, so it didn't last it didn't go too well. But what can you say about that?
PSYOP. Yeah, the devil's way is to typically make an accusation and flip it on you. And when you see that you've been unjustly accused, just flip it back on who the accuser is.
Exactly. Yep.
Nailed him.
Yep.
Yeah, talk about fake news. When you went to school, I went to government school. They call it public school. It's just a propaganda machine. They lied to me from the get-go. I had no idea. Took me a lot of years to figure out. I grew up in church. Took me a lot of years to figure out. Again, there's some basis of truth there, a whole lot of lies. There's a principle called limited hangout, which typically draws people.
We use that term a lot. The audience here is well familiar with it.
Yeah, and this is a way to frame a debate, to frame somebody's thinking, and you can allow lively debate within that little framed area. Yeah. But you've got to contain it, and this is how it's done.
It's a type of red herring fallacy, essentially, or straw man, which are in the same class. But all right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time tonight. I really appreciate the discussion. Thanks to everybody in the audience tonight. Thanks for all your support. Thanks for not going too wild tonight. The other night we had a homosexual on who was a victim of pedophilia as a child, and boy, did the trolls just go off in there, you know, and you knew they did not like us exposing that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if every one of them was involved in this stuff, you know. All right, Aaron, you have anything to add before we part here?
The only thing that came to mind talking about fake news, one of the other big things besides limited hangout, something we talk about quite a bit, is blown cover is cover. You know, they'll mention one thing like the Pizzagate or pedophilia, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and just they'll put it out there and manipulate it and spin it and limit it and repackage it and send it some other way. And it's just it's an evil genius way of manipulating and controlling. And
it's like their term. You saying that reminds me of their term, satanic panic, right? They couple it with the word satanic to make everybody think it was just delusional, when in fact all the stuff was really going on, and it was just a misleading thing. Part of the McMartin preschool trial ended up at this place, several blocks from here that Ted Gunderson talks about in Boys Town. Now, I do have a lot of questions about Ted Gunderson being FBI and DeCamp being the assistant to the director of the CIA. I don't trust anybody from the CIA. I think that was probably a limited hangout as well there. I think that was the CIA trying to get a hold of all of this stuff, and they didn't get into all of the vampirism and adrenochrome and all of that stuff either that you and I, we both have come to the same conclusion. You think that they're vampires at the top as well, right? The blood sucker pedivore type at the very top. Is that correct?
Goes hand in hand with the sodomy. It's part of the nature.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what? Before we part, let me show this. Somebody sent me this tonight. I forgot who sent it. I apologize. But this is from the dailymail.co.uk from March 6, 2016. British royalty dined on human flesh. But don't worry, it was 300 years ago. Of course, the 300 years ago part there, that's the false statement. What we're finding is that this stuff is rampant and going on throughout, so, and it apparently ties into the Dionysian mysteries and whatnot, but a lot of evidence seems to show that this stuff was and is going on. Mirjana Abramović, for example, and the whole Pizzagate stuff, all of the upper level stuff, but Mirjana Abramović really ties it together of how these things are still going on. Even if they're doing a mock ritual, they're still doing the ritual. I guarantee you when the public isn't there, it ain't mock. So, all right. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time tonight. Good night, gentlemen. Thanks for the great show.
Thanks, Jan.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
You're welcome.